Under the quiet sun of Cedar Hollow, a forgotten gas station stood alone by the road. Broken windows, rusted signs, and memories buried beneath dust. Everyone laughed when a veteran inherited it, saying it was worthless, a mistake, a waste of a life. But what if that place, abandoned by time, was waiting for the one person who had already lost everything, yet still believed in rebuilding? What if the real miracle was never buried in the ground, but living inside the hearts that refuse to give up? May you enjoy this story with peace in your heart and a smile on your soul. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. The air in early summer hung warm and calm above the small town of Cedar Hollow. The sunlight spread over the hills like a thin golden veil, touching roofs, fences, and the courthouse where the Thompson family gathered. There was no storm that day, no wind to carry away the whispers, only the stillness that made every laugh, every sigh, sound sharper than it should. Jack Thompson sat at the far end of the long oak table inside the courthouse meeting room. He was 47, broad-shouldered, but slightly stooped, with hands that bore the rough geography of years spent doing hard work. His hair, once dark brown, now carried silver at the temples. A short beard traced the edge of his jaw, neatly trimmed, but uneven in places. His eyes were a gray-green mix that shifted with the light, steady yet cautious, as if he had learned to study the world before trusting it. His clothes were simple: a faded denim shirt, brown jacket, worn boots. He carried the look of a man who had seen too much of both war and silence. At his feet lay Rocky, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat of deep sable and gold. The dog rested calmly, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the room with the discipline of an old soldier. There was a small notch on his right ear, a scar from service. He was trained to sense what humans hid: the invisible tension before panic, the faint tremor in breathing that betrayed old wounds. Rocky had followed Jack home from Afghanistan. His loyalty unbroken even after medals and uniforms had turned to memories. Across from Jack sat the rest of the family. They looked polished, clean, and comfortable in ways Jack had forgotten. His cousin Edward Miller leaned back in his chair, round-faced, hair slicked with too much oil, his tie bright red and loud. He smiled often, but never kindly. Next to him was Sarah Thompson, Jack's younger sister by 5 years, tall and sharply built, her auburn hair tied in a knot that did not allow for imperfection. Her gray suit looked as though it had never known a wrinkle. Her skin was pale, her lips pressed into a thin, steady line of judgment. She had once studied law, but left practice for real estate, where she built a reputation for efficiency and charm. That charm rarely reached her eyes. The attorney, Mr. Harlan, stood near the window, his posture straight despite his 70 years. His white hair was combed back, his spectacles glinting under the light. He was known in town for his calm and for the way he handled family disappointments, like a man used to the taste of bitterness. When everyone had taken their seats, Mr. Harlan cleared his throat and unfolded a cream-colored envelope. His voice carried the slow authority of habit as he began reading the last will and testament of Margaret Thompson, the grandmother who had raised both Jack and Sarah after their parents died. To my granddaughter Sarah, I leave the house on Lakeview Drive and the financial trust associated with it. To my nephew Edward, I leave my antique collection and the life insurance proceeds. To my grandson Jack, I leave the property known as Cedar Gas Stop and all land attached to it." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then came laughter. Edward chuckled first, the sound sharp and smug. "Cedar Gas Stop. That old dump has been closed since I was in high school." Sarah's smile widened slightly, her tone cool and precise. "Well, that seems about right. The soldier gets the ruins. Grandma always did love her sentimental projects." Jack said nothing. He sat still, tracing a line in the wood grain of the table with his thumb. The words Cedar Gas Stop pulled at him like a familiar scent. He saw again the dusty roadside sign, the red paint faded by years of sun. He heard the tin rattle of the windmill, the jingle of the small bell above the door, and the hum of his grandmother's voice as she made lemonade behind the counter. He remembered the smell of oil and sugar, of summer air thick with cicadas. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You could sell it, Jack. It might be worth a few thousand at best. I can put you in touch with a buyer. There's no point clinging to something that died before you left for the army." Jack lifted his gaze, slow and deliberate. His voice was calm but deep, carrying the gravel of years spent holding back words. "It's not dead." Edward laughed again, this time louder. "Come on, Jack. It's a rusted ghost. No one even drives that old highway anymore. You can't fix a place like that." Jack's hand tightened around the cup in front of him. He felt the familiar pulse of frustration, that rising heat behind the ribs. His heartbeat quickened. He could almost hear the old sound of helicopter blades, the sudden rush of sand against skin, the memory of men shouting his name through the roar of fire. Then Rocky pressed his paw gently against Jack's boot, a silent reminder that the war was over. He exhaled slowly. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough to make everyone else lean forward. "She knew I'd go back." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Go back to what Jack A. Graveyard of Gasoline pumps." Jack stood, the chair scraping softly behind him, his shoulders squared. "There's always something left," he said. Then he turned and walked out before anyone could reply. Outside, the afternoon sun burned soft on the courthouse steps. The air smelled faintly of pine and hot asphalt. Jack stopped at the bottom, breathing deeply. He looked down at Rocky, whose tongue lolled in the heat, but whose eyes stayed on him. "Well, buddy," Jack said, "looks like we've got a new mission." They walked together to the truck parked beneath the old oak tree. The vehicle was scarred with dents and mud, its rear seat filled with tools and spare parts. Jack opened the passenger door, and Rocky jumped in with practiced grace. The drive out of town stretched long and quiet. The landscape unfolded in slow, familiar waves of green pasture and low fences. Every few miles, Jack saw things that had not changed in decades. The small diner with the red roof, the water tower with faded lettering, the stretch of road where his grandmother used to wave as he rode his bike. His thoughts drifted between memories and the weight of present reality. He had spent years working small repair jobs after his discharge, always moving from town to town, never settling. Each place he went, people treated him kindly but cautiously, as if a man with his past carried some invisible risk. He could not blame them. He had seen how easily a noise, a flash of light, could pull him back into the dust and noise of war. Now he wondered if returning to Cedar Gas Stop was foolish or fate. He remembered his grandmother's voice, low and sure, telling him that broken things have souls too. They just wait for someone patient enough to listen. When he turned onto the old highway, the sign appeared at last. The red letters had faded to pink. The metal frame rusted. Cedar gas stop. The weeds rose to the windows. The building leaned slightly, a tired creature refusing to fall. Jack parked the truck and stepped out. The air shimmered with heat and the faint smell of oil and dust. He stood there for a long time, looking at the place that had once been his world. Rocky trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail stiff with alertness. The dog circled the front porch, sniffed the steps, and stopped beside the doorway, looking back at Jack as if to say the same thing he had said on battlefields long ago. It's safe enough to start. Jack walked up the steps. The wood creaked, but held. Through the cracked window, he saw the outline of the counter where his grandmother had stood, the shelves where jars of candy had lined up like small treasures. He pushed the door gently. It gave way with a groan, releasing a puff of warm air that smelled like dust and old fuel. Inside, light fell in thin bands through the broken blinds. Cobwebs hung like curtains. A photo still stood on the shelf behind the counter, its frame tarnished but intact. Jack picked it up and brushed away the dust. His grandmother smiled at him from another time, standing beside the gas pump with her hands on her hips, eyes fierce and bright. He whispered softly, though no sound of punctuation marked the space between his words. "You knew I would come back." Rocky padded closer and sat by his leg, head tilted, watching. Jack looked around the empty station, the peeling paint, the cracked floor, the sign outside barely clinging to its post. He felt something shift inside him, not quite hope, not yet strength, but the smallest flicker of purpose. It was the same feeling he had in the desert after a long night when dawn touched the sand, and he knew he had survived another day. He ran his hand through his hair and let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "Guess we start again tomorrow." Outside, the light softened into late afternoon gold. A car passed on the distant highway, its hum fading into silence. The world seemed still, waiting. Jack sat on the porch beside Rocky. The dog leaned against his knee, warm and solid. In that quiet, Jack understood what he had been given was not punishment. It was a second chance wearing the clothes of ruin. He looked across the field, where weeds swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in years, his mind was not filled with the noise of what had been lost, but with the question of what could still be rebuilt. The air over the countryside was warm and still. Early summer light washed the road in pale gold, and the fields on both sides whispered softly in the gentle breeze. Dust shimmered under the tires of Jack's old truck as it rolled along the cracked highway leading out of Cedar Hollow. The weather was calm, quiet, and clear, as if the sky itself had decided to hold its breath for his return. Jack Thompson drove in silence. His left hand rested on the steering wheel, while the other tapped absently against his thigh, a small rhythm to keep his mind anchored. The radio had long stopped working, leaving only the hum of the engine and the occasional bark from Rocky in the passenger seat. The dog sat upright, ears perked, tongue lolling slightly in the heat. His coat shimmered in the sunlight that spilled through the windshield, dark along the back, warm tan near his paws. His eyes were sharp and alert, scanning every shadow and passing fence as though he was still on duty. For Jack, the drive felt longer than the miles on the odometer. Each curve of the road peeled back another layer of memory. He could still recall riding his bicycle along this same stretch when he was a boy, waving to strangers, hearing his grandmother's laugh float from the porch of the gas stop up ahead. Now that same road felt heavier, filled with ghosts that did not speak, but pressed quietly on his chest. When the old sign appeared at last, half hidden behind weeds, Jack slowed the truck. Cedar gas stop. The paint was nearly gone, the letters more ghost than ink. The windmill beside it creaked faintly, moving in slow, uneven turns. He parked near the edge of the cracked pavement and cut the engine. The silence that followed was complete. No cars, no people, just the hum of summer insects and the steady breath of his dog beside him. Jack stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. He stood still for a long time, staring at the building that had once been the center of his childhood. The small office windows were shattered, the roof sagged, and the paint peeled away in long curls like sunburnt skin. The smell of old oil and dry wood hung heavy in the air. Rocky jumped out and trotted ahead, sniffing the ground, tail moving slowly. His movements were measured, methodical, as though he were inspecting a perimeter again. Jack watched him for a moment, then walked toward the porch. Each step stirred dust and fragments of glass. The wooden boards creaked under his weight, but they held. He reached for the door handle and pushed. The door groaned open, letting out a puff of air that smelled of rust, mold, and faintly of lemon, the ghost of his grandmother's cleaning habits. Inside, light filtered through the slats in the blinds, slicing the room into gold and shadow. The counter still stood, though warped with time. Shelves leaned against the walls, half collapsed under the weight of dust. A single chair lay overturned near the corner. On the wall behind the counter, a small framed picture hung crooked, its glass cracked down the center. Jack crossed the room and lifted the frame. It was an old photograph, yellowed and bent. His grandmother, Margaret Thompson, stood in front of the gas pumps, wearing a checkered apron and a bright smile. Her hair had been silver even then, tied in a bun. Her face lined but strong. In her eyes was the same quiet fire he had always remembered, the kind that could make people stop arguing and listen. He traced the edge of the photo with his thumb, feeling the dust crumble beneath it. He remembered her hands, how they always smelled of soil and soap, how they could fix anything with patience. When he was a boy, she had told him that this place was alive, that it had a heartbeat if you knew how to listen. Back then, he had laughed. Now, standing among the ruins, he wondered if she had known he would come back after losing everything else. Rocky padded to his side and sniffed at the photo, his nose brushing the cracked glass. The dog gave a small whine, as if recognizing the scent of something important. Jack set the frame down gently and turned toward the old desk behind the counter. Papers were scattered everywhere, faded receipts, rusted pens, a broken calculator. Among them lay a small tin box, half hidden under a pile of crumpled invoices. He pulled it free and blew the dust away. The hinges creaked when he opened it. Inside was a folded letter, its paper thin and yellow, tied with a piece of string. The handwriting was unmistakable. His grandmother's. Jack unfolded the letter slowly, careful not to tear it. The ink had bled in places, but the words were clear enough. If you are reading this, it means you came back. This place was never meant to die. It only needed someone who understood what it means to lose and still build again. The land remembers the hands that work it. Take care of it, Jack. It will take care of you. He stared at the words for a long time. The room seemed to shift around him, the air thicker, heavier. He felt his throat tighten. For years, he had drifted through life without purpose, working odd jobs, never staying long enough to call any place home. Every noise too loud, every crowd too close. People had called him quiet, distant, sometimes cold. They did not know that silence was the only thing that kept the memories from breaking through. Now this letter, this place, had cracked something open inside him. He pressed the paper to his chest and closed his eyes. The smell of old wood and gasoline mixed with the scent of dust and sun. Rocky leaned against his leg, tail brushing his jeans. Jack crouched down, scratching behind Rocky's ear. The dog's fur was warm, thick, and slightly coarse under his fingers. Rocky tilted his head and licked Jack's hand once, the same way he had on the day they left Afghanistan behind. Back then, it had meant we made it out. Today, it meant we start again. Jack stood and walked around the small shop, taking in every detail. He noticed how sunlight fell on the counter, the faint marks where tools once rested, the grooves on the floor from old boots. Everything was falling apart, yet everything was still here, waiting. He could hear his grandmother's voice in his memory. Broken things are only waiting for brave hands. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in a long time. Stepping outside again, Jack took a long look at the property. The field stretched behind the station, a patchwork of weeds and dry soil. The old windmill turned lazily, its metal frame squealing. To most people, it would look hopeless. To him, it looked like a challenge. He ran his palm over the wooden post near the steps. The wood was cracked, but solid. He imagined repainting it, rebuilding the porch, maybe one day lighting the sign again. Not to sell gas, but to prove that forgotten places could breathe again. The sun was lower now, painting everything in shades of amber. Jack felt the warmth on his skin and thought of how far he had come. From deserts filled with noise to this quiet place filled with memory. He felt afraid, but it was a different kind of fear, one that came from caring again. Rocky barked once, sharp and clear, tail wagging. Jack turned to him and nodded. "Yeah, buddy, I hear you. We start tomorrow." He walked to the truck, took an old tarp and a hammer, and began covering the windows to keep out the birds. The motions were small, but sure. Each nail he drove into the frame steadied his heartbeat. Each breath came easier. He no longer saw the gas station as a ruin, but as a wounded thing that deserved healing. When the sun slipped behind the trees, Jack sat on the porch with Rocky beside him. The light dimmed, and crickets began their slow chorus. The air was mild, almost soft. Jack leaned back against the wall, the letter folded safely in his pocket. He thought of the people who would laugh when they heard what he was doing. He imagined Sarah's voice calling him foolish. He imagined Edward shaking his head, telling others the veteran had lost his mind. But for the first time, their words felt small. They did not reach him anymore. Rocky rested his head on Jack's knee, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling in rhythm with his master's breathing. The two sat there quietly, man and dog, both scarred, both tired, both still willing to try again. Jack whispered into the warm air, "This place is not dead. Not yet." The windmill creaked again, turning once more before the world settled into evening calm. The day was warm and steady. The sun hung gentle over Cedar Gas Stop, and the sky was clear and pale, the kind of early summer blue that made the rust on the old pumps look almost soft. There was no wind, only the quiet hum of insects in the weeds and the slow creak of the windmill that refused to fall. It was the kind of weather that made the world seem peaceful, even when it was not. Jack Thompson worked alone in the heat. His denim shirt was rolled at the sleeves and damp at the collar. His hands were already raw from scraping old paint off the wooden frames of the windows. He worked in a slow and stubborn rhythm, the way a man breathes when he is holding himself together. Every scrape of metal against peeling paint gave a sound like tearing paper. Every nail driven into rotting trim felt like stitching a wound shut. He did not have money. He did not have help. What he had was time, bone-tired patience, and a promise he had made to a woman who no longer stood on this ground. He had dragged a cracked trash bin outside and was filling it with broken glass, dead wiring, the curled skin of old posters that still clung to the walls inside the shop. He had already swept the floor 3 times, and still the dust clung to everything like a memory that did not want to leave. Rocky stayed near him. The German shepherd moved with calm purpose. He was 6 years old, body powerful but controlled, coat dark along the back and warm tan down the legs. His eyes stayed awake even when his body seemed at rest. He checked corners. He checked doorways. He checked Jack. Rocky laid himself between Jack and any open space, like a gate that could breathe. More than once, the dog pressed his head lightly against Jack's hip whenever Jack's shoulders began to tighten. He knew the signs of tension before they bloomed into something worse. Jack did not talk much while he worked. He did not need to. His mind was already a crowded place. Thoughts moved through him like slow thunder. He heard his grandmother sometimes. He saw her hand on his shoulder. He saw himself as a boy on the counter, swinging his legs, laughing at something that was not funny but felt safe. He also heard other things, louder things, metal tearing, men yelling, his name shouted through smoke. When those sounds rose too high inside his skull, the world around him narrowed, and the edges of his vision shook. Those moments came more often when he felt watched, and today he felt watched. Word had moved through the town faster than he expected. Cedar Gas Stop is not dead. Jack Thompson is out there tearing it open. People had always liked to talk in Cedar Hollow. A town has a certain kind of hunger. It eats silence and spits out stories. The first truck that came was old, pale blue, and slow. Jack knew the sound of that engine even before it turned off. It was Mr. Parker's truck. Mr. Parker was a retired mechanic who had lived 2 miles down the road since forever. He was a narrow man, all elbows and sun, spots, with a face split by deep lines at the eyes and mouth. His hair was white and thin, and his short beard was more stubble than style. He smelled like oil and coffee. He had known Jack when Jack was still small enough to hide behind his grandmother's apron. Parker climbed down from the truck without a word. He walked with a small stiffness in his left leg, the gift of a fall from a ladder back in 1999, that still made him curse the change of seasons. He opened the truck bed and hauled out a metal toolbox, then a coiled extension cord, then an old standing fan with one bent blade. Jack watched him. Parker set the box down near the doorway of the station. He did not smile. He never smiled big. His voice came out low and rough, the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime talking over engines. "Heard you were working out here," he said. "Figured you might need a good cord, unless you like sweating yourself blind." Jack stood there for a moment. The words inside him gathered, heavy and slow, like rocks in his chest. He had not expected anyone to show up with anything but opinions. He nodded once. "Thank you," Parker grunted. He was a man who did not believe in fancy kindness. He believed in doing, and then going home. Your grandma was stubborn, he said. She would not let this place die easy. Guess I should have known you would be the same. Jack felt something move in him then. Pride, maybe, or a kind of ache. Stubborn, Parker had said. Not broken. Stubborn. He could live with that word. He could carry that word. Parker went inside to check the wiring near the counter. Rocky watched him for a long moment, then gave one small huff and lay back down. Permission granted. That part felt good. It did not last long. The second vehicle that pulled in was not old and friendly. It was a black SUV that gleamed in the sun like something polished for show. The door opened, and Edward Miller stepped out in a pressed shirt and clean jeans that had never seen work. Edward was in his late 30s, soft around the jaw and stomach. His dark hair slicked and shaped like he had an appointment later. His watch flashed in the sun when he moved. Everything about him said that he liked being seen, that he liked the idea of winning even in a place where there was nothing to win. Another door opened. Sarah climbed out. Sarah Thompson, younger than Jack by 5 years, tall and narrow and sharp. Her auburn hair was pulled tight at the back of her head. Her skin was fair and smooth, the kind of skin that stayed out of the sun. Her blouse was pale and tucked neatly, and her slacks had clean lines. She held herself the way she held her voice, with control. She always carried control like a blade. She had learned to do that early. The death of their parents had cut her in a different way than it cut Jack. He had gone outward, into service, into war, into survival. She had gone inward, into order, into rules, into plans. Control was the way she kept the world from shifting under her feet. They did not wave. They did not ask if now was a good time. They walked like they already owned the ground. Jack felt his throat close a little. His shoulders pulled tight without his consent. He did not like when people moved toward him fast. He did not like when voices came at him from two sides at once. Rocky rose to stand at his left, head level, body steady. The dog was silent, but nothing about him said soft. Edward spoke first. "So this is what you are doing out here, Jack. Working on this dump in the heat, like some drifter handyman." Jack said nothing. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist and set down the scraper. Sarah folded her arms. Her voice was smooth, but there was a thin crack of irritation under it. "We heard you refused to sell. That is not reasonable, Jack. You cannot hold on to this. It is unsafe. It is worthless. Worthless." The word landed harder than it sounded. Worthless was the word people used when they looked at him some days. Too quiet, too tense, hard to place, good with his hands but not easy to keep around for long. Worthless was not just about land. It was about a man. Jack felt heat bloom in his neck and behind his eyes. His pulse began to push hard in his temples. He could feel that other place waking in him, the one where everything narrowed and every motion in the air felt like a threat. His jaw locked, his fingers curled, the ground tilted. The edges of the gas stop pulled away from him, and for a breath, he was not in Cedar Hollow, but somewhere else. Somewhere with dust in his teeth and metal burning in the sun, and his own name being shouted through smoke. Rocky moved. The shepherd stepped between Jack and Edward, solid and sure, shoulders squared, head lifted. Rocky did not snarl. He did not snap. He simply took the space, claimed it, and planted himself like a wall. His presence hit the air like a warning bell. Edward stopped, His fake smile flickered. He lifted his hands, not playful now. Hey, relax. I am just talking. Sarah exhaled, annoyed. Oh, please, do not make this dramatic. We are trying to help you, Jack. You cannot manage this alone. You know how you get. You get wound up. You get unstable. You remember what happened before you left for the army. That last line cut deep. She knew it would. She always knew where to press. Jack stared at her. He did not blink for a long moment. In his chest, something twisted hard, unstable. That word landed like a slap. That word said, you are the problem, not the world. You. When he spoke, his voice came from low in his body, steady and slow. It surprised even him how steady it sounded. If you loved her, Sarah frowned. Loved who Grandma, he kept going. If you loved her, then bring a hammer, bring a broom, bring a trash bag. Do not bring a contract. For a breath, no one spoke. Even Parker, still inside by the counter, had gone still, listening from the doorway. The old man did not interrupt, but his eyes were on Jack through the dusty glass. Sarah tried to hold her posture, but a flicker of color rose in her face. This is not about love. This is about doing the sensible thing. No, Jack said. His voice did not rise, but it grew heavier. This is about whether you think anything broken is worth saving. Edward scoffed and looked away. His voice lost its smooth edge and turned sour. You are dreaming, man. You think you are going to fix this place by yourself and make it into something again. You think this is some hero project. Jack almost laughed. Not the laugh of joy. The laugh of a man who has lived long enough to know that people who never bled love to use the word hero on people they do not plan to help. He shook his head. No. I think I am going to clean it, because she asked me to. That is all? Sarah let out a small, hard breath and turned away. She had nothing left to say that did not make her sound cruel, and she had never liked sounding cruel in public. Edward muttered something under his breath, something quiet and bitter. Then both of them walked back to the SUV. The car door shut loud in the still summer air. Then they were gone. Jack stood there in the fading light, chest still tight, hands still shaking just enough for him to feel it. He hated that part. The shaking after. The way his body told on him. He felt open, exposed, raw. Rocky pressed against his leg, warm and real, eyes steady, reminding him, you are here, you are fine, you are safe. Parker stepped out from inside the station and wiped his hands on an old rag. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried a quiet weight. You handled that better than most men would have. Jack let out a long, slow breath. Did not feel like it. Parker shrugged a narrow shoulder. Feeling is not the point. Doing is the point. Jack looked at the doorway of the gas stop. He looked at the windows he had not yet fixed, the dust he had not yet cleared, the floor that still carried his grandmother's footsteps somewhere beneath years of neglect. He looked at Rocky, who had already settled back down, like a guard who trusted the ground again. In that moment, with the sun dropping softer across the pumps and the day easing toward evening, Jack understood something simple and solid. The fight for this place had already started, but it was not a fight to win money. It was a fight to keep a promise. He picked the scraper back up. We start again tomorrow. The morning opened soft and warm over Cedar Hollow. The sunlight slipped through thin clouds and rested on the cracked pavement of the old gas stop. The smell of dust and engine oil mixed with wild daisies that had grown along the fence. A gentle wind moved through the dry grass and rattled a loose sign above the door. It was a quiet day, But inside, Jack Thompson quiet was a fragile thing. Jack had been working since dawn. His shirt was stained dark with sweat, his jeans coated with dust. Every muscle in his arms ached from lifting, scraping, and patching. He had already cleared the back room of rusted cans, broken hoses, and pieces of glass that had lain buried in the floor for decades. Each object he tossed away felt like removing a piece of grief. He had learned to fill silence with work because if he stopped too long, the silence filled him instead. Rocky followed him from room to room, tail low, but wagging slightly whenever Jack spoke to him. The German Shepherd was older now, 7 years old, strong, but wiser. His muzzle touched with gray, and his eyes a deep shade of amber that caught light like gold. He moved with the patience of a creature who had learned to read human hearts. Whenever Jack's breath hitched or his shoulders tensed, Rocky would come close, pressing against his leg until the tremor passed. Jack knelt on the floor of the garage bay, running a scraper under a sheet of warped linoleum. Beneath it, the concrete was dark and rough. He paused, wiping his forehead, and for a moment, the silence of the place wrapped around him like an echo of something old. He could almost hear his grandmother's, humming faint and steady the same melody she used to hum while waiting for customers. That memory warmed him and hurt him at the same time. Then Rocky stopped moving. The dog froze near the center of the floor, nose low, ears forward. His tail stiffened. He sniffed once, then twice, and pawed at the ground with deliberate rhythm. Jack frowned. He knew that signal. It was the same one Rocky had used overseas when something below the surface did not belong. Jack crouched beside him, brushing away dust and dirt. He murmured softly, asking what it was. Boy. Rocky sniffed again, then scraped harder claws, clicking against something that sounded different. Not concrete, metal. Jack's pulse picked up. He went to the corner, grabbed an old crowbar, and returned. Working slowly, he chipped away at the hardened surface. The dust rose around him in soft gray clouds. After a few minutes, the tip of the crowbar struck something flat and hollow. He knelt closer and brushed the dirt aside. There it was. A metal plate, roughly 2 feet wide, rusted but solid, bolted down into the floor. The surface bore faint letters almost erased by time. He squinted and traced them with his thumb. RM, his grandmother's initials. Jack sat back on his heels. His throat went dry. His grandmother, Rose Miller, had been many things. Strong, secretive, gentle but not simple. She had run this gas stop alone after her husband died, and no one ever really knew how she managed. She had kept records, locked drawers, and a lifetime of quiet resilience. But a hidden plate in the floor, marked with her initials, was something else entirely. Jack said softly that Rocky had found something. The dog wagged his tail once, as if proud, but waiting for permission to continue. Jack pried at the edge of the plate with the crowbar. It resisted at first, then gave way with a slow groan. The smell that escaped was thick and old, a blend of damp earth and rust. He coughed, waving his hand in front of his face, and leaned closer. Beneath the plate was a small cavity square and lined with rotting wood. Inside sat a metal box, coated in grime, its corners dented but intact. He pulled it out gently and set it on the floor. The box was heavier than it looked. The latch was stiff, but after a few careful pulls, it opened with a click. Inside, wrapped in cloth, yellowed with age, were several folded papers, a small leather-bound notebook, and an envelope marked, "For my grandson, if he ever returns." Jack stared at the envelope for a long moment. The handwriting was hers, looping, and strong. His hands shook as he opened it. The smell of paper and lavender filled the air. The letter inside was short, written in faded blue ink. My dear Jack, if this reaches you, then you have already done what I hoped for. You have come back to where it all began. This place was never just a business. It was a refuge. During the hardest years, travelers, soldiers, and families found warmth and food here. I opened my doors when no one else would. There is a reason this land still stands. It remembers kindness. Do not sell it. Do not close it. Open it again, not for profit, but for the lost ones who still wander. That will be your inheritance, my boy. Love, Grandma Rose. Jack read the letter twice before folding it carefully. His eyes burned, but he did not cry. Not the way most people cry. His grief came quiet and deep, like something breaking underwater. He ran his hand across the notebook next. Its leather cover was soft and worn. Inside were pages of names, dates, and notes in Rose's hand. Each entry marked a person who had stopped by for shelter or food. Some were veterans, some travelers, some people simply running from storms in their own lives. He traced one line with his finger. Tom, H. 1967, rested 2 nights. Found work in town. Another read, Martha and Son, 1973, lost home to fire. Helped rebuild chicken coop. Each story was short but full. Each note carried a quiet pride. Jack leaned back against the wall, letting the late light slide across his face. He could feel something in his chest loosen, like a door unlocking after years of silence. For the first time since he returned, he understood why this place had felt alive even in its ruin. It had been built, not for selling, but for saving. Rocky came and sat beside him, pressing his head under Jack's hand. The simple weight of the dog's skull against his palm steadied him. Jack scratched, behind Rocky's ear, his voice low and firm, saying she wanted this open again. Not for us, but for them. The dog's tail brushed against the floor once. Jack smiled faintly. He looked around the empty garage, at the shelves, still half collapsed, the peeling walls, the cracked windows. It was all broken, but it was still standing. And maybe that was the point. He packed the letter and notebook carefully into a clean rag and placed them on the counter. The metal box, he decided, would stay open. It was no longer a secret. It was a beginning. As dusk settled, the horizon turned amber, and the hum of cicadas rose from the fields. Jack stood in the doorway of the gas stop, the last light painting the edges of the pumps in gold. He looked down at Rocky. The dog sat straight, head-high eyes, fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something. Jack spoke softly, saying they would open it again, just like she wanted. And in that quiet promise, surrounded by rust dust and fading sunlight, the old station seemed to breathe again. The morning air was cool and steady. A soft haze rested above the highway, and the light came slow over the hills, turning the broken glass of the old gas pumps into pale gold. The wind carried the smell of earth and motor oil, and a single bird perched on the half-fallen sign, as if watching over the place. It was quiet, but not the empty kind. It was the quiet that comes before life begins again. Jack Thompson stood near the doorway of the gas station and looked at what he had built with his own hands. The cracked walls were now patched with new boards. The faded sign had been scrubbed clean and repainted in red letters that read, "Safe Stop." The old coffee machine inside worked again, and the shelves, though not full, held cans of beans, bottles of water, and maps for travelers. He had turned the place from a ruin into a shelter. It was still rough, but it was alive. Rocky lay near the entrance, his fur shining in the early light. The German Shepherd had become more than a companion. He was part of the rhythm of the station. Whenever a stranger came down the road, Rocky was the first to stand, tail wagging slow, body alert, but kind. His presence alone calmed people. There was something in his eyes, something steady and forgiving, that told even the lost they were safe here. That morning, the first visitor came before noon. A truck rolled in slow, its tires whispering against the gravel. The man behind the wheel was in his 50s, broad-shouldered but slumped, his clothes covered in dust and engine grease. His name was Walter Briggs. He had the look of a man who had spent more time on the road than in a home. His beard was uneven, streaked gray and brown, and his eyes were the pale color of worn denim. He climbed out of the truck, moving stiffly, one hand pressed against his lower back, and nodded toward Jack. "Morning," he said in a low voice that carried the weight of habit rather than greeting. Jack nodded back and told him there was fresh coffee inside if he wanted. Walter hesitated, looking around at the rebuilt pumps and the dog at the door. Then he smiled, a tired but honest smile, and said that coffee sounded better than anything. Inside the station, Walter sat on one of the old stools near the counter. Jack poured him a cup of coffee and asked if he was headed far. Walter shook his head slowly. "Not sure yet," he said. "Been driving for work, moving equipment from one site to another. Sometimes I just keep going because stopping feels worse." Jack understood that feeling. The silence after a long drive could open wounds you thought were gone. He nodded and said that some places were meant for stopping, and maybe this was one of them. While they talked, Rocky stayed close, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes on Walter. The man reached down once to pat his head, and the dog leaned into his hand with a soft sigh. Walter smiled again, smaller this time, and said he used to have a shepherd too, back when things were better. By late afternoon, another traveler came, a woman in her 30s named Clara, driving a small red car packed with boxes. She was tall and thin, her dark hair tied back under a faded cap, her hands nervous on the steering wheel. When she stepped out, her movements were careful, as if the world might break beneath her feet. She asked Jack if she could rest for a bit before continuing south. He told her she could rest as long as she needed. Clara had the quiet of someone running from something she could not name. She barely spoke at first, only nodded and smiled when Rocky approached her. The dog sniffed her shoes, then sat beside her without a sound. Something about that simple act made her shoulders drop, as if the weight she carried had eased for a moment. She sat on the step outside, looking at the wide sky, one hand buried in the fur of the dog beside her. Jack watched from the window. He had begun to notice that it was never the words that healed people. It was the stillness, the feeling that someone cared enough to stay near without demanding anything. That was what Safe Stop had become. A place that asked for nothing and gave rest instead. By evening, the lights of the station glowed warm through the glass. Jack had fixed the wiring so that one lamp stayed on all night. He called it the night light, a symbol that no traveler should ever find the road without a bit of glow to guide them. Walter stayed to help clean up after dinner. Clara offered to sweep the front porch. They did not talk much, but when they did, it was gentle talk about weather, about dogs, about roads that went nowhere and still felt worth driving. Jack felt something settle inside him as he watched them. For years, he had lived with a hollow he could not name. War had carved it deep, and grief had kept it open. But now, as he leaned against the doorframe with Rocky beside him, he felt something filling that space again. It was not pride or peace, but purpose. Before heading to his cot in the back room, Jack stepped outside once more. The highway stretched empty in both directions, silver under the moon. The night air smelled faintly of cedar and gasoline. Rocky sat beside him, tail sweeping slow against the concrete. Jack looked down at him and spoke quietly. "This place has light again, old friend. You did good." Rocky lifted his head, eyes reflecting the porch lamp, calm and loyal as ever. Jack reached down to pat him once before turning toward the door. Inside, the lamp above the counter burned steady through the night, a small circle of gold against the dark. It was the light that never slept, and under its glow, Safe Stop was no longer just a station. It was a promise kept. The sun rose behind a thin veil of clouds, painting the highway in pale silver. The air was still, warm, and heavy with the scent of fuel and early dew. The fields on both sides of the road shimmered in light, and Safe Stop stood quiet in the morning calm, its sign glowing faintly against the sky. It was the kind of day that looked peaceful but carried weight underneath. Jack Thompson moved across the small lot, his boots kicking up dust. He had been up since dawn, checking the generator and refilling the old cooler with ice. Safe Stop had grown busier in the past weeks. Truckers stopped for coffee, travelers asked for directions, and some came only for silence. The place was becoming what his grandmother had dreamed of. Yet peace never lasted long for Jack. He had learned that good days often came before hard ones. Rocky followed close behind. The German shepherd's fur gleamed bronze under the sun. His muzzle was older now, but his body still strong, his movements slow and sure. He watched everything, every car that passed, every stranger who paused too long. Jack often said Rocky saw more truth in people than any man ever could. By mid-morning, a black pickup truck rolled in, newer than most that stopped there. Its tires crunched over the gravel, and when the engine died, the silence afterward felt heavier than before. A man stepped out, tall and broad, with a sharp face and neatly cut dark hair. His clothes were too clean for labor, and his boots looked like they had never touched mud. He wore a gold watch that caught the light each time he moved. His name was Richard Hale. He was known around Cedar Hollow as a local businessman, the kind who smiled for cameras and shook hands only when it served him. Richard looked around the station slowly, eyes scanning the new sign, the patched walls, the porch, where a few travelers sat sipping coffee. His smile was polite, but thin. He walked toward Jack with the slow confidence of someone used to being listened to. "Morning," Jack said, his tone neutral. Richard nodded, offering a hand. His grip was firm, calculated and cold. He said he had heard about what Jack was doing here and admired the effort. Then he added that he had an offer. He wanted to buy Safe Stop, the land, and everything on it. He spoke in an easy rhythm, explaining how he planned to turn the area into a logistics hub, a rest and service center for transport companies. He said it would bring jobs and progress. He smiled again, as if it were all a favor. Jack listened, but said little. He had learned long ago that words can trap a man faster than chains. He simply said the place was not for sale. Richard tilted his head slightly, as though he had expected that answer. He said everyone had a price, and that sometimes it was not about money, but about what a man could not handle anymore. He looked around again, his voice smooth, but edged. He said that running a place like this must be exhausting for one man, especially someone with Jack's history. That last phrase made something tighten inside Jack. He did not like when people used the word history the way others used the word wound. His jaw clenched and his hands flexed. Rocky shifted beside him, standing tall, eyes fixed on Richard. The dog did not growl. He simply stood, his presence filling the space like a silent warning. Richard glanced down at him, lips pressing into a faint smirk, then looked back at Jack. Jack said again that it was not for sale. His voice was calm but final. Richard gave a slow nod, pretending to accept it. But his eyes carried something else, a promise of trouble. He said that progress could not wait forever, and that Jack should think carefully before refusing opportunities. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove off, leaving a thin trail of dust behind. The sound of the engine faded, but the tension stayed. Jack stood still for a long moment. His pulse beat heavy in his chest. He could feel that old pressure rising again, the same kind that had lived with him since the war. His breath came sharp, his vision narrowing for a second. He saw flashes of desert light and burning metal, the echo of a radio screaming in his head. His body froze, caught between past and present. Then a soft weight pressed against his leg. Rocky leaned in, steady and silent, grounding him back into now. Jack dropped a hand to the dog's back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Slowly, the noise in his head faded. He knelt beside Rocky and stayed there for a long minute. The dog's eyes met his, calm and knowing. Jack whispered that he was fine now. The words came rough, but true. Later that day, a storm began to form over the hills. The air grew darker, the wind carrying dust across the road. Travelers hurried in before the rain started. Walter, the trucker who had stayed a few nights before, helped bring in the chairs from outside. Clara wiped down the counter while Jack secured the door. They had both stayed to help since the day they first stopped by, and in their quiet way, they had become part of the place. When the rain finally came, it fell hard, drumming against the roof and spilling through the gutters. Inside Safe Stop, the lamps glowed warm and golden. Walter handed out coffee. Clara served bowls of soup, and Rocky lay near the door watching the storm. The travelers inside spoke softly, sharing stories of roads and miles. The storm outside was fierce, but inside there was calm. Jack looked around at the faces lit by the soft yellow light. He felt the weight in his chest ease a little more. He thought about Richard Hale and the kind of power men like that believed they had. But what mattered most could not be bought. He walked to the counter and turned the switch that powered the porch light. It glowed bright through the rain, shining into the night like a signal for anyone lost on the road. Jack whispered under his breath that this place was staying. And in the sound of the rain against the roof, the Safe Stop held steady, becoming what it was meant to be, a haven for the weary and a light for those still searching. The air was thick and gray before sunrise. Clouds rolled in from the west, pressing low against the hills. The wind carried a restless hum through the trees, and the first drops of rain darkened the dirt road outside Safe Stop. The day had not yet begun, but it already felt heavy, as if something larger than weather was coming. Jack Thompson stood at the doorway, watching the horizon. He could smell the rain before it fell, that sharp scent of iron and soil mixing with the faint trace of gasoline. He had seen storms before, many worse than this, but there was something in the stillness that unsettled him. It reminded him of waiting for impact, that long silence between the whistle and the blast. Rocky stood beside him, body tense, ears up, tail low, reading the air the same way Jack did. By mid-morning, the rain turned hard. The sound on the metal roof grew steady and strong. Jack checked the windows, nailed the loose boards, and moved supplies to higher shelves. Clara and Walter were both inside helping. Walter was steady as always, his big hands working quietly, his face serious but calm. Clara moved quickly, her dark hair plastered to her neck, her voice clear despite the storm outside. She had grown since the day she arrived, stronger, her fear slowly replaced by purpose. The power flickered once and went out. Jack started the backup generator, the low hum filling the silence between thunder. Safe Stop glowed again, warm against the gray outside. Then the first knock came. A man stood outside, soaked from head to toe, his jacket ripped at the sleeve, his eyes wide with panic. He said his car had stalled a few miles back, and his wife and child were still inside. Without hesitation, Jack grabbed his coat, flashlight, and rope. Walter followed, but Jack told him to stay, to keep Clara and the others safe. Rocky barked once, a deep sound that meant ready. The storm tore at them as they moved down the road. The wind pushed hard against their legs, and the rain cut like needles. The beam from Jack's flashlight wavered through the downpour. Rocky led the way, nose down, moving with sure steps even in the mud. When they found the car, it was half off the road, one wheel sunk deep into the ditch. Inside, a woman clutched a small boy, both shivering. Jack shouted above the wind that they would get them out. Rocky circled the car, barking to guide their movements. Jack pulled the door open with effort and wrapped the rope around the woman's waist first, telling her to hold tight. He led her up the embankment, steadying her with one arm, then came back for the child. The boy could not have been older than 5, hair dark and plastered to his face. His small hands gripped Jack's jacket as if it were the only solid thing left in the storm. When they reached Safe Stop again, Clara rushed to cover them with blankets while Walter brought hot water. The woman held her son close, crying softly into his hair. Jack stood off to the side for a moment, watching them. He felt the ache in his muscles, the tremor in his hands, but under it was something else, something deep and quiet. It was the same feeling he used to get when a rescue went right, when lives that could have been lost were not. More knocks came as the day went on. Travelers stranded on the road, a bus driver whose route had been washed out, 2 young men on motorcycles who had run out of gas. Each one found their way to the light glowing through the rain. Jack opened the door again and again, his body soaked and his hair plastered to his forehead, but he did not stop. By nightfall, the storm was at its worst. The wind howled, the rain came sideways, and the thunder rolled so hard it shook the ground. Inside, Safe Stop was full. People sat on the floor wrapped in blankets, steam from hot soup fogging the windows. Clara moved between them with calm hands. Walter stood guard by the generator, his eyes steady. Rocky paced near the door, keeping everyone calm, resting his head against frightened legs, pressing close to those who trembled. Jack looked at them all, the faces of strangers, tired and frightened, lit by the soft yellow lamps. He felt a swell in his chest that he could not name. He realized that his grandmother's dream had come to life in this storm. The place she built to save the lost had found its purpose again. The next morning the storm passed. The fields shimmered with water, and the air smelled clean and new. The road was broken in places, branches scattered, but the station still stood. Travelers began leaving one by one, each stopping to thank Jack, Clara, Walter, and the loyal dog who had guarded them through the night. 2 days later, a local news truck came. The story had spread fast. People in town spoke about how one small station had taken in everyone during the worst storm in years. The mayor himself came out that afternoon, a short man with silver hair and a round face weathered by years of public service. His name was Henry Collins. He shook Jack's hand firmly and said the council had voted to designate Safe Stop as an official emergency shelter for travelers. Jack said little, only nodded once. But when he turned, his eyes found Rocky lying in the shade near the door, tail thumping softly against the ground. Jack felt something deep settle inside him, a mix of pride and peace. That night, he stood outside again. The sky was clear, the stars wide and sharp. The porch light glowed steady, shining over the wet road. Safe Stop had a name now, not just a place, but a beacon. It was the light that others could follow, the one that never turned away. Rocky sat beside him, silent as always, eyes reflecting the lamp. Jack rested a hand on his head and spoke softly that they had done it. And under the calm sky of Cedar Hollow, Safe Stop shone like a promise kept. The evening sky stretched wide over Cedar Hollow, painted in soft gold and fading blue. The air was calm, carrying the scent of warm dust and pine. The wind brushed through the tall grass by the roadside, whispering through the metal letters of a sign that now read, "The Light Station." Years had passed, but the light above the door still glowed steady every night. Jack Thompson sat on the old bench outside, the same bench he had built with his own hands long ago. His back was straighter than his years should have allowed, though his shoulders carried a quiet weight. His hair had gone gray around the edges, his beard thin and silver, and his face was marked by deep lines carved by sun and memory. His eyes, once sharp with vigilance, had softened into something gentler, the kind of gaze that saw beyond fear. Safe Stop had grown. What was once a cracked gas station had become a small community hub. Locals called it the Light Station because its lamps had never gone out, not even during the hardest winters. Travelers came not only to rest, but to give back. The coffee pot was always full, the shelves never empty for long. And every story told within its walls carried the same refrain, that kindness could survive anything if someone chose to keep it alive. Rocky lay near the porch steps, his coat now pale with age, gray spreading across his muzzle and ears. He moved slower these days, his breaths heavier, but his eyes still followed Jack with the same steady trust. He had been more than a dog, more than a guardian. He had been a witness to every storm, every quiet morning, every life that passed through the station. Jack reached down and brushed his hand along Rocky's back. The fur was rougher now, but still warm. The dog leaned into his touch, tail wagging once before settling again. Jack smiled faintly. He spoke softly, his voice carrying that slow rhythm of an old man who had learned the value of silence. He said they had done good work, that the world had not forgotten what they built. From the distance came the faint sound of a car pulling up. The headlights rolled over the gravel, cutting through the soft evening light. A young man stepped out, maybe in his late 20s, tall and lean, his dark jacket coated in road dust. His name was Daniel Hayes. He was a paramedic stationed in the next town, and this was not his first visit. He had stopped by often since the night he had found shelter here during a storm years ago. Jack had taken him in then, just as he had taken in so many others. Daniel carried that memory like a compass. Daniel waved and called a greeting. Jack raised a hand in return, motioning for him to come sit. The young man's face was open and bright, but there was a tiredness beneath it, the kind born of long shifts and too many rescues. His short brown hair was tousled, his hands marked by faint scars, and his uniform shirt was half unbuttoned at the collar. He had a calmness about him, but it was the calm of someone who had learned to carry other people's pain quietly. He sat beside Jack and glanced toward Rocky. He smiled, reaching down to pat the old dog's head. Rocky lifted his gaze for a moment, then rested again. Daniel said that the town still talked about Jack, that the light station had become a landmark for travelers across the county. He said people came by just to see the place, to leave a note on the bulletin board, or to light a candle for someone they lost. He said that a few veterans even called it sacred ground. Jack chuckled softly. He said sacred was a heavy word for a gas stop, but he appreciated it all the same. Daniel said that maybe it was not the place itself, but what it stood for. Jack looked out at the road and nodded. He said maybe it was about the simple truth that light mattered most when things got dark. They sat together in the long quiet that comes when words are no longer needed. Inside, Clara, now older herself, but strong as ever, moved between the shelves, stocking supplies. Walter had passed away the year before, his picture framed on the wall above the counter. The station was still alive because people kept it that way, not through profit, but through care. As night fell, the first stars began to show. The air cooled, and the lamp above the porch flickered once before glowing steady. Jack rose slowly, his joints stiff, but his steps still sure. He walked to the edge of the porch, looking up at the sign. The words, "The light station," caught the glow from above, bright and steady against the dark sky. He thought about all the nights that light had guided someone home, about the people who had arrived, broken and left a little more whole. He thought about his grandmother, about the letter he still kept folded in his coat pocket, worn thin from years of unfolding and reading. He thought about the promise he had made to open the doors and never close them again. Rocky stirred beside him, rising to his feet with a slow stretch. The old dog came to stand beside Jack, their shadows long in the lamplight. Jack rested a hand on his head again, his palm trembling slightly from age. He whispered to him softly, saying they had done it, that they had kept the light alive. He said there was no treasure in this world greater than kindness and loyalty. The dog pressed closer, as if he understood every word. Behind them, the door opened and Clara stepped out. Her hair was streaked with gray, her eyes warm and calm. She asked if he was coming in. Jack smiled and said he would, in a moment. He wanted one last look at the sign, one last breath of the cool night air. The wind picked up, gentle and warm, carrying the scent of rain somewhere far away. The porch light swayed slightly, casting gold over them both. Jack looked at Rocky and smiled again. His eyes glimmered in the glow, soft and certain. He said quietly that they had done it, old friend. And as the night deepened around Cedar Hollow, the light station stood glowing against the dark, the lamp burning steady above the door. The light did not shout or fade. It simply remained, patient and faithful. like the people who had built it. In that quiet hour, the man and his dog stood side by side, guardians of a promise that had never dimmed. In the years that followed, the light station became more than a shelter. It became a living testament to faith, to small acts of grace that ripple outward in ways no one can measure. People came not only for warmth or rest, but to find something they had lost along the road: hope. Jack's story, and the steady loyalty of his dog, reminded everyone who passed through that even the simplest kindness can grow into something eternal. It taught that love does not fade with time, that healing can be found in the act of helping another soul find light again. And so the lamp of the light station still burns each night, not as a symbol of what was built by hands, but of what was built by heart. It tells every traveler, every lonely spirit, that miracles still exist, not in thunder or fire, but in the quiet decision to care, to stay, to believe. May the Lord bless every heart that listens, every traveler still searching, and every home that keeps its light burning through the dark. If this story touched your spirit, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, say a prayer, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. Together, we keep the light alive.